We'll need to confirm these details for the record.
Your Honor, I understand.
Judge Grayson believed he was about to sentence an oblivious teenager, until the accused began tearing apart the prosecution's argument like a veteran attorney. The atmosphere inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse felt heavy, nearly stifling. The gallery was crowded with onlookers, whispering among themselves as they witnessed the drama play out. The defense table seemed oversized for the young man standing next to it, hands shoved in his pockets, chin lifted just high enough to signal he wasn't intimidated. Jalen Dawson, 19, charged with grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The allegations were weighty, but the way Judge Walter Grayson regarded him revealed the real contest had little to do with legal codes. Grayson leaned backward in his chair, his fingers tapping idly against the gleaming wood surface. He gazed down at Jalen over the tops of his glasses, his mouth curling into something caught between a grin and a sneer. "So, you think you're some kind of legal prodigy?" His voice dripped with dry sarcasm. "This isn't your high school debate club, kid." Scattered laughter rippled through the room, the bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor, all joining in on the mockery. But Jalen didn't budge. He wasn't laughing. He had been preparing for this moment for years. Not this exact one. He hadn't imagined standing here as the accused, but he understood courtrooms as intimately as most teens knew their favorite songs. While others memorized basketball scores, he memorized rulings. While his friends were glued to video games, he staged imaginary trials in his mind, arguing both sides. His mother, Denise Dawson, had worked as a paralegal for over 2 decades, and Jalen had grown up absorbing the stories she carried home. Prosecutors cutting corners, judges showing bias, defense lawyers phoning it in. He took it all in. By 14, he could dissect a trial better than many first-year law students. None of that, however, mattered to Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another troubled youth. "Let's move this along," the judge muttered, flipping open the case file. "I've got a tea time at 2. The spectators laughed again, but this time the energy shifted. Jalen's lips curved into the faintest of smirks. Grayson had just slipped. The audience hadn't realized it yet. Prosecutor Mitchell Carrington rose from his chair with the self-assurance of a man who believed the verdict was already in his favor. His suit was sharp, his tie neatly cinched, and his voice carried the polished assurance of someone who had recited the same lines 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will demonstrate beyond any shadow of doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was discovered in possession of a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6, reported missing only hours prior to his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown, where he is said to have attempted escape before ultimately being detained. His fingerprints were recovered from the steering wheel. The prosecution maintains that the evidence is undeniable." The statement landed with gravity. The spectators in the gallery stirred, whispering quietly to one another. On its face, the narrative was damning. A stolen vehicle, a pursuit, resistance. Judge Grayson peered at Jalen over his glasses, then redirected his gaze to Carrington. "Proceed." The prosecutor strode toward the jury box, his polished shoes striking against the floor with each step. "The defense may attempt to persuade you that this is merely a misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson is nothing more than a victim of unfortunate circumstances." He paused, locking eyes with Jalen for the first time. "But let's be real, what kind of victim runs from law enforcement?" The air in the courtroom grew heavier. Judge Grayson leaned forward, chin resting against his hand. Jalen did not flinch. Carrington pressed on, shuffling through a set of documents. "Your Honor, I present the sworn statement of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally observed the defendant behind the wheel before the attempted flight. The vehicle was verified stolen. The arrest was conducted properly in full accordance with procedure." Grayson exhaled softly through his nose, nodding. "Seems straightforward to me." And to most in the gallery it did appear clear. Stolen car, pursuit, arrest. A neat, simple case. But Jalen had spent too many years dissecting courtroom battles not to notice the fissures. Still he remained wordless, waiting, watching. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel gently. "Very well. Let's hear the defense." He turned his attention toward Jalen's attorney, Lisa Thornton, a public defender who had spoken barely 3 words since the session began. She rose, shifting uneasily. "Your Honor, my client." Jalen placed a hand lightly on her arm, a silent signal. She faltered, hesitating. She sat back down and for the first time Jalen spoke. "I'll be handling my own defense, Your Honor." The chamber went utterly still. Grayson fixed his gaze on him, visibly entertained. "You'll what?" Jalen's tone was even, unwavering. "I'll be representing myself." A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff's eyebrows shot upward. Carrington's smirk faltered briefly before he barked out a short laugh. Well, this ought to be entertaining. But amusement vanished the moment Jalen took his first step forward, because the entire balance of the room was about to shift. The weight of the courtroom pressed down as Jalen squared his posture, his hands still tucked in his pockets. He let the silence linger, just long enough to make them uneasy. Then at last he spoke. "Your Honor, before I proceed, I'd like to clarify something with the prosecution." Carrington arched an eyebrow, folding his arms. "Go on." Jalen moved a step closer, slow and deliberate. "You stated that Officer Daniel Ruiz personally observed me behind the wheel before my arrest. Correct?" Carrington sighed through his nose, already sounding dismissive. "That's right. And it's documented in his report." "Of course it is." Jalen gave a brief nod, then shifted toward Judge Grayson. "Your Honor, I motion to strike that testimony from the record." Grayson narrowed his eyes. "On what basis?" For the first time, Jalen slid his hands free of his pockets, gesturing toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that vehicle. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of bewilderment crossed Carrington's face. "What exactly are you implying?" Jalen took another measured step forward. "Your Honor, if permitted, I'd like to request the court verify Officer Ruiz's GPS records from that evening. If his report claims he witnessed me inside the car, then his location data should confirm it." He paused, letting the thought hang. "But I have a strong suspicion it won't." Now the murmuring in the gallery swelled. Grayson's brow furrowed as he glanced toward Carrington. Counselor Carrington cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. "That report was submitted by a sworn officer of the law, Your Honor. Are we truly going to weigh the word of a defendant against that of a trained professional?" Jalen gave a slight, almost indifferent shrug. "If the officer was exactly where he claimed, the GPS data will corroborate it. But if he wasn't?" He let the sentence fade away. Grayson regarded him for a long beat, then turned his attention to Carrington. "Does the prosecution object to verifying the officer's GPS logs?" Carrington hesitated. The pause lasted only a moment, but it was enough. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. Most importantly, the judge noticed. Jalen drew a quiet breath. He had spent years observing trials, analyzing prosecutors, their maneuvers, their tricks, the ways they bent procedure, and there was one truth he understood completely. If Carrington truly trusted his evidence, he wouldn't be stalling. Grayson exhaled, massaging his temple. "Counselor?" Carrington finally shook his head. "No objections, Your Honor." But the shift had already happened. For the first time, no one in the courtroom was laughing. The silence was thick, yet the tension spoke volumes. Carrington fumbled with his papers, the edges of his polished confidence beginning to fray. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains. The defendant's fingerprints were discovered on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle." Jalen inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "That's correct." He stepped forward. "But let's examine that piece of evidence for a moment." Grayson lifted a brow, gesturing for him to continue. Jalen turned toward the jury, deliberately making eye contact with each of them. "The prosecution wants you to accept that because my fingerprints were found inside the car, that automatically means I stole it. That's the story they're trying to sell. But let's consider this rationally." He inhaled, voice calm, steady. "Say you walk into a clothing store and try on a jacket. You slip your hands into the pockets, maybe zip it up, then return it to the rack and leave. Later that day, someone shoplifts the same jacket. Would your fingerprints on it automatically prove you committed the theft?" A few jurors glanced at one another. Someone in the gallery murmured under their breath. Jalen didn't give them time to recover. The car in question was sitting outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. "I was inside that store with 3 friends. And yes, when we passed by the vehicle, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think twice about it. I didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal a thing from inside. Just a careless moment of curiosity." He let the words settle for a beat. Then, with a voice sharp enough to cut through the silence, he asked, "Does simply touching something make you a criminal?" Carrington cleared his throat, rifling through his notes, desperate for something, anything, that might help him regain control. But Jalen wasn't finished. "And since we're discussing this, let's talk about how that fingerprint analysis was conducted." He pivoted toward Grayson. "Your Honor, was the forensic examiner in this case subpoenaed to testify?" Grayson blinked, momentarily thrown off. He glanced at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated, then admitted reluctantly, "No." Jalen pressed his lips together. "So let me get this straight. The state wants to rely on forensic evidence to convict me, but didn't bother to bring in the actual specialist who processed it? No chance for me to cross-examine, to question the chain of custody, or to challenge the accuracy of that analysis?" Carrington's jaw tightened. Jalen gave a small nod, as though that alone confirmed what he needed. "Interesting." Judge Grayson exhaled heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man slowly realizing this trial wasn't going to be the straightforward victory he expected. But Jalen wasn't done, not yet. Because what came next would change everything. He stepped forward slowly, voice steady but firm. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence an official statement from the vehicle's owner." Grayson's brow furrowed. "The owner?" Jalen nodded. "Yes." Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, gave a statement to police that, curiously, was never included in the prosecution's filings. And I think I know why. He turned toward Carrington. "Do you recall what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen?" Carrington's jaw locked tight. He already knew what was coming. Jalen didn't wait for him to respond. Instead, he withdrew a printed transcript from his folder and read it aloud. "I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and driven off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid and he was white." A collective gasp rippled across the courtroom. Jalen held the page aloft. "This is from the original police report, the same report the prosecution conveniently neglected to mention." He turned back to Judge Grayson. "And the arresting officer omitted this from his testimony. The prosecution disregarded it, and yet they still expect this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the actual thief, am guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." Carrington stepped forward, scrambling. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle." But Jalen shook his head. "No, I wasn't." His tone never rose, but it sliced through the courtroom with razor clarity. "I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned, walking home after grabbing snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't fleeing from anything. The only thing connecting me to this case is sloppy police work and assumptions." Judge Grayson released a slow breath, rubbing his temple. The case was unraveling quickly and everyone in the room felt it. Jalen pivoted back toward the jury. "The real suspect got away that night. The officers saw a black kid in the area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about." Silence blanketed the room. Grayson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Does the prosecution have anything further?" Carrington stood rigid, his face flushed. "No, Your Honor." Judge Grayson exhaled, eyes lingering on Jalen for a long moment before shifting to the jury. At last, he leaned forward and spoke words that would stay with everyone present. "Case dismissed." A stunned pause. Then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously into their notepads. Jalen didn't move right away. He let the moment breathe, let the weight of it sink into everyone around him. Judge Grayson, still gripping his gavel, studied Jalen with an unreadable expression. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, recognition, maybe even regret. Jalen met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge's voice called out, "Mr. Dawson." Jalen froze, though he didn't turn around. Grayson hesitated, then finally spoke. "You should think about law school." Jalen smirked. He didn't need to think about it. He was already on his way. Outside the courthouse, the air was alive with voices. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward like weapons. "Jalen, did you know the judge would throw out the case? What are you planning to do now? How does it feel to outmaneuver an experienced prosecutor?" Jalen tugged his hoodie over his head, ignoring the barrage of questions. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. This wasn't about showing off how clever he was, it was about something larger. His mother, Denise, waited for him at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Her arms were folded, her face unreadable. For a long moment she just stared at him. Then she shook her head and exhaled. "Boy, you nearly scared me to death." Jalen gave a small laugh, scratching the back of his neck. "Had to take the risk, Ma?" She held his gaze for another second before pulling him into a firm embrace. "You've always been the stubborn one." Cameras continued flashing, but Jalen no longer noticed them. Across the street, leaning against his car, Judge Grayson watched. His stance had changed, the arrogance was gone. His face no longer carried amusement but something else, something nearer to contemplation. He hadn't thought this case would be anything more than routine. Another file, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he understood he'd remember it. Because Jalen had accomplished what most people couldn't, he had forced the system to see itself. And for once, the system blinked first. Here's the lesson worth remembering. How many other cases had unfolded this way? How many convictions came not from solid evidence, but from bias, shortcuts, and a machine more concerned with closing files than uncovering truth? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back. But what about those who didn't? This wasn't just about one case, it was about all of them. And Jalen knew his path forward. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in. But next time he wouldn't be sitting at the defense table. He'd be standing as the lawyer. And when that day arrived, he wouldn't be the only one. If this story made you stop and think even for a moment, then share it. The justice system may be written in laws, but it is carried out by people. And people can change, but only if we push them to. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and let's keep the conversation alive. Because next time it might not be Jalen. It might be someone you know.